A shift in perspective occurs when you're not consistent with your use of verbs or pronouns. And in this video, we'll just talk about pronoun shifts. There are two kinds of pronoun shifts to watch out for. You can either shift awkwardly from the singular to the plural, okay, and we call this a shift in number, or you can shift in terms of the person that you are talking about. And we have pronouns here that are first person, second person, or third person. If you shift awkwardly from one to another, then it's a shift in person. Let's have a look at both of these categories in some detail, and we'll look at some examples. So the first one then, shifts in person, we start with, they were playing laser tag, we were having so much fun. You can see that they, over here, this is a third person pronoun, whereas we is a first person pronoun. And if you are actually trying to talk about the same people, the same group of people, then it would indeed be very awkward to shift from the third person to the first person. I think this is a fairly obvious error. This is one we can easily fix. We can make them the same. They were playing laser tag. They were having so much fun. Or we can put them both in the first person. But not every shift in perspective is necessarily bad. If you look at the second example here, we can all use some TLC, and you don't have to feel bad about treating yourself once in a while. We've shifted from the first person to the second person, but this is not necessarily a problem, and I think the sentence reads just fine as it is. The point then is not to go overboard and correct every shift in perspective, but just watch out for ones that you find quite awkward and that need a little bit of fixing. The second kind of shift to watch out for is a shift in number. And these kinds of shifts are more common, and they're more difficult to spot sometimes. Here we start with one of those politicians, one being singular, and then we say one of those politicians confessed that they had rigged the vote. They is plural, and the problem is that we have sort of assumed that they refers back to politicians, which is also plural, but it really should refer back to one. And that's why if you are trying to be super correct here, this should be he or she, which would make it singular. Okay, so one of those politicians confessed that he or she had rigged the vote. Of course, it would make much more sense to pick one of these because presumably you know which gender this one person is. So you might say he had rigged the vote or she had rigged the vote. Now, they here is what we sometimes call singular they. And singular they is becoming increasingly common in colloquial speech, so when people talk to each other on the street, but in academic writing it's still somewhat frowned upon, and I would probably rejig this to make sure that they're both singular here, or if you do quite a major revision you could make things plural. Then we have the last one, and this one kind of reaffirms the same point. So we have the Department of Conservation, that's singular. Its is also singular, so far so good, but then they in the next sentence is plural, and the same mistake creeps in. And I wanted to add this example here because often the mistake also happens when you're dealing with a group or some kind of organization. And a group may include multiple members, but often a group or an organization is singular in terms of grammar. And that's why you really have to watch out that you don't use these kinds of plural pronouns. Those are the two pronoun shifts to watch out for. Watch out for shifts in person and in number.